Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, so my husband and I are sailors. You guys probably know that. I talk about it a lot, I know. But we have been for over 30 years, and some of our favorite moments are being out on the water. No one's around us for what seems like miles. However, coastlines and land is often still in sight. Neither of us have done serious offshore sailing or crossed an ocean alone, something that many others have done.
Not yet.
Yeah, that's right. We still have
Not
time. It is those solo sailors, both men and women, who have ventured out single-handed that really know what it's like to be truly alone out on the ocean and often for days, Tim.
Our next guest has crossed the Atlantic in his 28-foot sloop Fox. Richard King writes about it, weaving his journey through those of other sailors who have sailed out of sight of land and alone. It's all Carol in his new book, Sailing Alone, A Surprising History of Isolation and Survival at Sea.
All right, Richard, needless to say, this has been a fun thing, and I've been looking forward to my producer, Paul Brennan, was like, you gave me the book a while ago, so it's been fun. We've been counting down the days to you. Welcome. Tell us about, first of all, you are a sailor. You've gone at it alone on a boat across the ocean. But tell us why you wanted to kind of put this together, tell your story, but also tell the story of many other sailors who've done that as well.
Sure, and thanks a lot, Carol and Tim, for having me on. And Carol, look forward to hearing about your adventures. I sailed by myself in 2007 across the Atlantic, and I definitely don't see myself as a super sailor. It was a little bit of a bungling affair, and in some ways, going out of sight of land, off the coast is easier, right? There's less to hit and less to keep track of. But I did it for a couple different reasons, and that was one of the things that I explore in this book. I'm really telling the history of people that have gone to sea by themselves and crossed oceans by themselves since at least the early 1700s. And all the way up to today. And so I was trying to explore, why did people go? Why would they go? And then also what they saw out there, just like you did in that intro, Carol, what is it like to be out at sea by yourself on a quiet boat, really close to the surface, day after day, and really getting that connection to the ocean world.
Well, and I love that, the book about, why they go, what they see. So when you took your trip across the Atlantic on Fox, your 28-foot sloop, why did you go specifically, and what did you see?
Yeah. I was in graduate school at the time, and I studied literature of the sea. I'm actually more of a scholar than, a sailor. And I'd spend so much time reading about these experiences. And I was like, maybe I could do that. And so I'm really proud of sort of the logistics of the voyage, not necessarily the execution, but I did make it. And, some of the things that I saw out there was just a really close connection with some of the seabirds, particularly storm petrels. Mm-hmm. I had one moment, which many of the listeners will sort of connect with, where I was fishing off the back of the boat and I saw a fin coming behind me, a really large dorsal fin. And I kind of freaked out. I was like, oh my gosh, Jaws is going to leap right on top of the boat and, eat me up. And, I quickly went down below and I took pictures and I grabbed my boat hook as if I was going to, stab it in the eye or something like that. And then later when I look at the pictures, I realized it was this tiny little fin. It probably wasn't even a shark. It might have been like a pilot whale or something. But, you just really get that sort of intense connection, particularly the nights at sea and the sunrises and sunsets. And it's a rare, privileged experience, really.
Maybe because I'm an anxious New Yorker, I'm just wondering about the anxiety of being out there.
It's so calm.
I know it's calm, but there's this feeling that I have. I'm not a sailor. I've sailed before, but I would not consider myself a sailor, of not being in control of when you can get back on land. And that part of this totally freaks me out here. Were there any moments out there that you just found yourself terrified?
Like when the engine died on that trip across the Atlantic?
Yeah, Tim, totally. I would say 90% of the time I was an anxious wreck, and my people are also from New York, so
Okay.
I have that strain.
Okay.
I think, and that's really, the book is really about some of these great sailors who have gotten over that first anxious experience. I kind of never did. I did my first trip across the Atlantic, and then afterwards I was like, okay, I think I'm good. But I do kind of wish that I had continued on, because you look at some of the really extraordinary historical sailors, Bernard Mortizier, Robin Knox Johnson, Ellen MacArthur, even, the early ones like Joshua Slocum, who got over those initial anxious moments and then were able to carry on and really be calm and really enjoy themselves at sea. And often that's when these sailors really got these experiences in the natural world where they could finally relax and not have to worry so much about this thing breaking or
there's something always breaking on a boat. You know that.
Yeah.
It's always breaking. Well, what's the joke? They say it's like hours and hours of boredom broken up by, minutes or seconds of just sheer terror and chaos. And that's kind of sailing, right? Because it's really quiet out there. And then you have to go into harbor and you have to dock. And it's like there's always something that's going to go wrong.
That's right. And for a big part for solo sailors, trying to steer the boat and trying to get rest is a big part of it. And so one of the things I talk about in the book is sort of the development of various technologies that have made it a little bit easier for solo sailors, whether it's GPS or fiberglass or the marine engine. But self-steering mechanisms, whether they're wind-based or electrical, have made a huge difference.
You had a wind,
but even in my case,
did you have a wind vane? That's what you used, right, to go across?
That's right. I had two different types of steering. I had a wind vane self-steering, which doesn't require any power or any fuel, and that is about the most magical device on the planet. That was developed sort of in the 1950s and 60s for recreational boats, and that was just amazing. But that's based on relative wind. So if you went to sleep for 2 hours and you got up, the boat is adjusting itself based on the angle of the wind. So if the wind shifts, your boat is going to change. And then I also had a little electrical tiller pilot, which you could set to a compass point.
I'm curious about the reasons behind this and how, not necessarily yours, which I want to get to, but the way that they've shifted over time. Because as you mentioned, in the 1700s, a lot of this was exploration. It was in search of riches. It was in search of, at that point, not necessarily new lands, but sort of, right? The great exploration of the seas and of the earth. But these days, a lot of it is about recreation and it's about sort of personal challenges. And I'm wondering how you can characterize the evolution of why someone would do this.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And that's certainly something I sort of trace through going over time, because, that the whole idea that going sailing by yourself across an ocean, that isn't completely just a bananas, idiotic kind of thing, that this idea that over time people started to respect that is a sort of interesting transition. And you do see sort of blips. Everybody is different and everybody's complex about whether they're escaping a family situation or they are trying to make money or they're trying to make fame for themselves. But you do see sort of these sort of blips of where there's more recreational sailing and then even more solo sailing. One of these blips is right after World War II, and I focus the book a lot, sort of frame it on Ann Davidson, who's the first woman that we know of to sail alone across an ocean, and she sails in 1952, and she's part of this whole surge of people from Europe, from North America, from all around the world that really are going out to the ocean and seeking that sort of respite, that sort of perception that the ocean is a clean, unhampered space, particularly after the trauma of World War II.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating, right? To kind of hear what they sought out, right, to help them through it. I want to go back to something you said earlier, and that was, I think, the first solo circumnavigator, or who was actually, let me let you pick the story that you just were really drawn to, because there's older folks a long time ago. There's teenagers, which I'm always blown away by, someone who's a teenager who gets in a book and their parents are in a boat and their parents are like, yeah, go for it. I think about, there was a Netflix movie just on Jessica Watson, an Australian teenager, and it's kind of wild.
Yeah, Jessica Watson is fantastic. And I think one of the things that I talk a lot about in the book is this relationship between being a writer, because going to sea, maybe even for you, Carol, even when you go out just for an afternoon or for a day, it's a literary endeavor. You're keeping a logbook, maybe you're writing a note, you're writing a letter, you're reading about other sailors. And so it's this very sort of almost all of these people that are going sailing alone are also thinking about it artistically, and some of them are thinking about writing a book even before they've left. And so someone like Bernard Martissier, who in the 1960s was the first to sail solo nonstop around the world, 1.5 times around the world in the late 60s. And for him, from the very start, it was about making a book, about crafting this work of nature writing, not even as much about the expedition itself. It was like as if Thoreau, was climbing Everest.
Just got about a minute left here. I mean, 30 years of sailing, we saw our first whale play with us in a boat off of Rhode Island just this past summer. And my husband and I looked at us, maybe it's time to sell the boat because it was just so unbelievable. But you have about a minute left here. Is there a moment in time where you just, I don't know, a little story before we go, unfortunately?
Sure. Yeah. I think one interesting story is, if you're watching in the news, you're seeing orcas that are damaging boats off Gibraltar that are actually seem to be knocking into recreational boats. And one thing that you learn from the history is that's been happening for a while. And one former New Yorker, Teddy Seymour, born in Yonkers, the first black sailor to sail alone around the world. And he was knocked by an orca off the Red Sea for about a half a day, but luckily just kind of banged into his self-steering gear. But he tells a great story of it.
I got to tell you, we watch the orca videos and we watch all these people, whether it's the YouTubers, Project Atticus or Vagabond, or, my husband and I are obsessed with it. And you get a feel of what it's like to be out on the ocean. Professor,
just 15 seconds left. Would you do it again?
I think I do it with friends.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's that's what most of them do. And some of them have a couple kids and they're going around the world, but they eventually on some of those big crossings bring friends on. This was so much fun. I hope we get a chance to talk again, and maybe you will buy. Do you have a boat now?
Don't. Yeah, if anyone would like to donate one, I'm available.
Well said. Richard King, his book is Sailing Alone, A Surprising History of Isolation and Survival at Sea, joining us from Santa Cruz, California. A great place to go sailing, no doubt about that.
Richard visiting Professor of Maritime History and Literature with the Sea Education Association.